What happens when the most powerful people in Africa leave the presidential palace and head to the farm? For some African presidents, farming isn't simply a political talking point. It's a personal business. Cattle ranches, dairy farms, poultry operations, maize fields, soybeans, goats, fish ponds, and even exotic game breeding. Some of these presidents entered agriculture long before they entered politics. Others built their farming enterprises alongside successful careers in business, and remarkably, some still spend time personally inspecting their farms, supervising workers, harvesting crops, or checking their livestock. Today, we are counting down 10 current African presidents with some of the most notable publicly documented private farming enterprises. This isn't a ranking of who is the richest, it's not an assessment of political performance, and it's certainly not an official ranking. We're focusing specifically on private-owned or personally associated farming and livestock enterprises. Their scale were reliably documented and the types of agricultural businesses these presidents are known to operate. And there are some very surprising names on this list. Let's get started. At number 10 is Joseph Boakai, the president of Liberia. Boakai is particularly interesting because agriculture has been part of his professional life for decades. Before becoming president, he served as Liberia's Minister of Agriculture and later became involved in agricultural consulting and equipment. But his connection to farming isn't only political. The Joseph Nyuma Boakai Foundation identifies a farm in Bomi County that belongs to Boakai and has been made available to the foundation as a training center for farmers. The farm is intended to support activities including rice, vegetable, cash crops, and improved agricultural techniques. This gives Boakai a slightly different farming story from some of the larger commercial ranchers on this list. His agricultural property has also been connected to a broader mission of helping Liberian farmers, and that is important because Liberia remains heavily dependent on imported food. The country's agricultural potential is enormous, but productivity remains a major challenge. Boakai's own farming property therefore sits at the intersection of personal agriculture and national food security ambitions. His story shows that a president's private farm doesn't necessarily have to be a massive commercial empire. Sometimes the significance is in how that private agricultural asset is used. Number 9 is Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Faye is one of the newer faces in African presidential politics, but he already had an agricultural side long before becoming president. According to biographical information published about him, Faye has a strong personal interest in agriculture and livestock and has spent time working in the fields in his home village. It's also been described as a papaya producer, but there's something even more concrete. Faye's 2024 declaration of assets listed a 4.5 hectare agricultural property in Sandiara, together with investment in the development of the farm. The declaration included spending on infrastructure such as fencing, a borehole, basins, a pump, and irrigation system. That detail is important. This isn't simply a piece of rural land. The documented investment in irrigation and other infrastructure indicates an intention to make the property productive. And that's consistent with Faye's broader interest in agriculture. Before becoming president, he was already publicly associated with farming and livestock. For a young president whose political message emphasizes the economic transformation, that personal connection to agriculture adds an interesting dimension to this story. Number 8 is Evariste Ndayishimiye, president of Burundi. If you want a president who has publicly presented himself as someone involved in farming, Ndayishimiye is a particularly interesting example. He has a private farm in Gitega and has spoken about spending time away from the presidential mansion and working on his farm. An interview with African Leadership magazine described him as showing journalists around his private farm, emphasizing his desire to lead by example. But his agricultural interests go beyond crops. A livestock and agriculture publication reported that Ndayishimiye has a fish farming operation in Bugenyuzi involving multiple ponds and species including tilapia, carp, and catfish. The same publication reported a poultry operation as well. Burundi is a country where agriculture plays an enormous role in people's livelihoods. So Ndayishimiye's personal farming activities fit directly into the country's economic reality. His approach has been to encourage citizens to see agriculture and livestock not simply as subsistence activities, but as ways to generate income, and his own farm gives him a personal example to point toward. At number 7 is Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Mahama's farming story is particularly interesting because reports have documented multiple private agricultural properties. According to Ghanaian reporting, Mahama has farms in the Savannah region. One is associated with soybeans and maize production. The maize produced there has reportedly been sold to a poultry feed operation. Another property is focused on livestock, with reports describing a herd of hundreds of goats and other small ruminants. Think about that for a moment. This is not simply a president visiting a farm for a photo opportunity. The reported operation includes crop production, livestock, and a connection between agriculture and the poultry feed industry. That is essentially an agricultural value chain. You grow the crop becomes animal feed, and the feed supports another agricultural industry. That kind of integration is exactly what many African countries are trying to develop at a national level. And Mahama has the unusual position of being able to speak about agriculture not only as a president, but as someone with personal experience running farms. At number 6 is Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa's private agricultural operation has received significant public attention. His Prikabe farm, located in the Kwekwe area, has been used as a working agricultural property and has hosted political and government figures. In January 2025, Zimbabwe's state broadcaster reported that legislators from across the political divide toured the first family's Prikabe farm. The farm was described as producing crops including maize, potatoes, and soybeans. The farm has therefore become more than just a private rural property. It has also become a showcase for the agricultural philosophy promoted by the president's administration. Zimbabwe has enormous agricultural potential, but it has also experienced serious food security and land productivity challenges. So a president operating a productive private farm carries symbolic significance. It sends a message: agriculture can be commercial, agriculture can be mechanized, and farming can be treated as a serious business. At the same time, because he is a sitting president, any discussion on his private agricultural interests naturally attracts political scrutiny. That makes his farm one of the more politically interesting presidential agricultural enterprises on the continent. At number 5 is Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. Kagame is not usually the first name people mention when discussing African farmers, but he does have a private agricultural property. His farm in Rwanda has been publicly documented, including visits by other African leaders. In 2023, Kagame received Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi at his farm in Bugesera, where he presented Nyusi with the traditional Inyombo cattle. The farm is particularly associated with cattle, and cattle has enormous cultural and economic significance in the Great Lakes region. Kagame's farming interests therefore connect modern commercial agriculture with one of Rwanda's oldest agricultural traditions. What's also interesting is the regional network surrounding cattle. Uganda's Yoweri Museveni is also a major cattle farmer. Rwanda and Uganda have long shared cattle traditions, including the famous longhorn breeds. So when presidents exchange cattle, they are not simply exchanging animals. They are exchanging agricultural heritage, breeding stock, and economic relationships. Kagame's farm therefore represents another version of the African farmer president, a modern head of state with a private livestock enterprise connected to traditional cattle culture. Now we're entering the top 4, and at number 4 is Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa. Ramaphosa is arguably one of the Africa's most famous political figures to have a serious personal interest in cattle and game farming. His private property, Fala Fala Wildlife, in Limpopo has become well known for both cattle and game breeding. Ramaphosa himself has explained that his love for cattle goes back to his family heritage. He has said that he acquired a farm in Mpumalanga because he wanted a place to keep his own cattle. His farming interest later expanded into specialized livestock and wildlife breeding. Ramaphosa has described breeding several cattle types, including Ankole, Boran, and Bonsamara. He also became involved in game breeding, including buffalo and other wildlife species. That makes Fala Fala quite different from an ordinary cattle ranch. It's wildlife management, breeding, and investment. Ramaphosa has also hosted cattle auctions at the property, including events involving Ankole cattle breeders. And because South Africa has one of Africa's most developed commercial farming industries, Ramaphosa's operation fits into a sophisticated agricultural economy. For him, farming isn't simply about producing food. It's also about genetics, breeding, conservation, investment, and high-value livestock. At number 3 is Uganda's Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Museveni may be one of the most famous farmer presidents in Africa. His private agricultural activities are centered around cattle ranching, including properties associated with Rwakitura and Kisozi. Museveni has spoken openly about his cattle. In one of his published speeches, he discussed cattle that had been passed down through his family and said that he had continued multiplying the herd together with his children. His public activities at his farms have also been well documented. At Rwakitura, for example, he has been photographed inspecting his cattle and personally moving around the farm. But Museveni's agricultural philosophy goes far beyond cattle. He has spent decades promoting commercial agriculture. At his Kisozi ranch, he has discussed livestock production, pasture management, coffee, fruit growing, poultry, fish farming, and other agricultural activities. In 2024, he described the development of his own ranching area and discussed the transition from traditional free-range cattle systems toward more intensive production methods. His farm has therefore become part of his political identity. Museveni often presents agriculture as one of the ways ordinary Ugandans can move from subsistence living toward commercial wealth creation, and few African presidents have spent as much public time talking about their own agricultural experience. At number 2 is Zambia's Hakainde Hichilema. If you are looking for a president whose private farming career clearly predates his political career, Hichilema is one of the strongest examples. His farming journey reportedly began while he was still a university student. He invested savings in cattle and gradually built up his livestock holdings. Over the years, his agricultural interests expanded into ranches and commercial farming. Hichilema has also publicly described himself as a cattle rancher. In an earlier interview, he said his private farming operations include ranches in locations such as Chisamba, Choma, and Kolomo, operating under the name HH Farms. These aren't merely historical claims. In 2025, Hichilema was reported at his Ibamba farm in Namwala, where he launched a maize harvest. The property had previously been used for cattle ranching and was being diversified into crop production. Other reporting has also documented his Choma ranch and his cattle business. One 2025 report described a planned auction involving thousands of bulls at his Choma farm, although figures reported by individual outlets should be treated cautiously. The important point isn't the exact number of cattle, it's the business model. Hichilema's agricultural interests include cattle ranching, crop farming, and diversification, and that makes his private farming story especially relevant to Zambia. The country is heavily associated with copper, but Hichilema has consistently argued that agriculture can become another major pillar of the economy. His own career provides a powerful example of that idea. Before becoming president, he was already building businesses, including farming enterprises. At number 1 is Kenya's President William Ruto. Few sitting African presidents have developed such a recognizable public identity around private farming. Ruto's agricultural interests are diverse. They include dairy cattle, poultry, crops, livestock, beekeeping, and mechanized farming. One of his best-known agricultural properties is Koilel Farm in Uasin Gishu County. In August 2025, Ruto was photographed personally attending to dairy cattle at the farm. Reporting described him as taking a hands-on approach to farming and supervising agricultural activities. But Koilel is only part of the story. Ruto has long been associated with poultry farming, going back to his famous story of selling chickens before becoming a major political figure. Kenya's Ministry of Agriculture previously described him as a livestock enthusiast and reported that he owned one of the country's major farms. More recent reporting has described activities at his farms involving cattle, sheep, goats, chicken, crops, and irrigation. One report described Koilel as a commercial crop operation, producing maize and vegetables, while other properties have been associated with livestock and poultry. And this is what makes Ruto's agricultural story particularly interesting. It's not one farm producing one product. It's diversification: crops, dairy, poultry, livestock, beekeeping, mechanization, and irrigation. Ruto has also publicly connected his personal story to agriculture. His famous political narrative of starting out as a chicken seller became a major part of his image as a self-made entrepreneur. Whether you're a supporter or critic, the agricultural component of Ruto's personal brand is difficult to ignore. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, like the video, and comment below which African president has the most impressive private farming enterprises. Thank you for watching.